and welcome to the Scramble. Thanks for joining us. I'm Tommy Laren. We have some heavy topics to discuss today, from international and diplomatic relations to military policy changes, all the way to the missing Malaysia airliner. Before we open the floor for debate, I'd like to introduce our panel. We welcome Ryan Hamilton, a graduate student in journalism and media studies. We have Alex Velto, a senior in political science with a minor in Brookings Public Policy. Next, we have Jennifer Leese, also a graduate student in journalism and media studies. And last but not least, we have Jason Hawley, a graduate student in journalism and media studies as well. Thanks for being here, guys, and let's get to it.
Thank you.
We would certainly be remiss if we didn't begin today's show with a discussion on the escalating situation in Ukraine. Matters are continuously shifting in the region, but to give you a brief overview, the unrest began in November when Ukrainian President Yanukovych rejected a landmark association and trade deal with the European Union in favor of closer ties with Russia. Since, a separatist movement in the region has begun, with pro-Russians on one side and pro-Western Ukrainians on the other. As of last week, Russian President Vladimir Putin's forces have been strengthening their presence in the Ukrainian city of Crimea. The United States and members of the European Union have vowed sanctions against Russia. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has rejected an offer of talks with Putin until Russia engages with U.S. proposals on Ukraine's crisis. The U.S. and Ukraine have called the referendum on whether the Crimea should join Russia illegal. What do you guys think? Are U.S. and EU sanctions enough? Has our response been strong enough? And where do we go from here? Now, this is an incredibly complex and dynamic crisis, but we will attempt to tackle it here today. So who wants to start? Alex, go with you.
Yeah, I think our response has been somewhat okay, but I don't think it's been strong enough. I think that we need to work with the EU more to increase the sanctions we put on the energy sector. But I think that strategy needs to be two-pronged because the EU does have an energy demand. Coupled with that, we need to start increasing our refineries and making them more capable of exporting natural gas because we have tons of supply. It's just a question of getting it to the EU. Once that were to happen, it would make the threat more credible. And if we put on sanctions on their natural gas, they'd be more willing to back away because Russia could not respond aggressively. After they invaded Ukraine, the markets responded and their stock market dropped dramatically, which caused them to back off initially. So it shows that it's an effective strategy.
Well, according to a former journalist at the Moscow Times, who is now the senior editor at Vegas 7 magazine, he did actually speak on campus last week and did, number one, kind of bring to light some of the misconceptions propagated by the media, especially the New York Times, Washington Post, etc., which have even alluded to the idea that their markets have gone down. The Moscow Times, if you go to their homepage, they would actually say the exact opposite. And the market's doing great. Putin is reassuring that everything is okay. So it's just kind of this, there's this opposition here in regards to what's being put out there by the media.
Well, they're also saying that there was an American journalist that was on Russia Today that she stopped. She quit her job, but she's saying that there's a lot of propaganda going on, a lot of misinformation that's being told to the Russians. So then it's a question of, what is the true information? What is actually accurate in this case? If so much of the information that the Russians are getting is propaganda,
which is historically probably very true. Limited information in Russia. Ryan, what do you think about that?
I think that's right. With deference to your friend at the Moscow Times, I don't think the former Soviet Union, now Putin's Russia, is the most free of presses around the world. No. I think one issue that we have to I think, take a far view of is making sure that Europeans are more prepared to defend themselves as opposed to relying on American military strength to project power against Russia. I think that they haven't shown very much of an appetite for fighting, and that's because the European Union has been able to draw down much of their military forces, where the United States has chosen not to, and they've sort of benefited from our willingness and our ability to project power all over the world. And I think
they're relying on us.
Yeah, and I think that in the future, this is just one of the many conflicts that's going to come up in that region in the future, particularly if Russia continues to go down the road that it's going and the new resources in that area continue to emerge. So I think we need to make sure that the Europeans are more prepared to engage, or at least have the ability to do so. And I don't think they do right now, and I don't think that's what the course of the future is either.
Well, I don't necessarily know why it matters that the EU is willing to engage. I don't think there's any possibility of a land battle between the US and Russia. The only type of potential conflict is one that will involve nukes, because the minute one of us attacks the other country, they're going to use it or lose it. They're going to drop the dead hand. So I think that the idea that it even matters that the EU has a strong military presence is nullified by the fact that we have such a strong nuclear arsenal that can take out Russia's military, or take out the entirety of Russia, that It's really just a question of whether or not we can use the market and use economics to leverage against them, because I'm a pretty strong believer in mutually assured
I feel like there's a history of analysts who likely would have said the same thing before Vietnam and before Afghanistan, that a protracted land war was something that wasn't going to happen. The history has shown that even when the Soviet Union, which I think was a much less rational actor than the Russia we have today, are challenged, it doesn't necessarily immediately go to war. There could be proxy conflicts, right? Land battles, air battles, and conventional warfare is still the route that people are going to take when the alternative is nuclear devastation of the country.
Well, number one, look, I mean, Putin is a former KGB. The fact that there is a more rational institution in power today is debatable. And second, Afghanistan, look at the demographics, look at the economic development or lack thereof. In the Middle East at the time in which we invaded, it was much different than a Russia today, which is a nuclear country, and nonetheless one that is not willing to back down. If we look at the historical aspect of their culture, it is one that is that cannot be emasculated. It will not back down, and it's a question of if we mess with them, if Europe messes with them in any way, there could be a very real chance of nuclear war. And even the editor at Vega 7, the former journalist in Moscow Times, stated, "We are in the riskiest time since the crisis with the Soviet Union, since the Cold War." So for the fact that he would say that is interesting. The fact that there's this highest chance of nuclear war than we've ever had, perhaps, at this very moment.
I think it's interesting as well that Mitt Romney did bring that up, that Russia's our greatest threat. Jenny, what do you think about that? Is Russia really a threat to the United States at this point, or just to Ukraine?
Well, Russia, I hope people throwing around nuclear threat is they're just being a little over the top.
Should calm down.
Yeah.
Take a step back.
I mean, let's relax. Let's, it's the irony in this is the fact that the U.S., we really don't want to get into another fight, and what's funny is it's not like the top countries that's worried about, getting into like these massive battles. It's these like lower tiered countries and having issues with themselves where they're going to pull the U.S. into it because, again, like Ryan said, we're basically, the EU's like military base, which is, I'm not cool with that. But anyway, as long as.
So do you think it should be economic, as Alex
I think it should
out?
be economic, and I really think we should squeeze them with gas and with just with energy supplies. I think that's the biggest thing. Because plus it's not like how it was before, and all the countries, no country wants any kind of like nuclear problem. We're not like we were in the Cold War. Everything is so globally entrenched, with trade agreements, with global money. Anyone has a recession, any kinds of issues. Everything is touched worldwide. So no one wants anything to escalate or get anywhere close to this.
I think it's important though to think what would happen if there was an unstable Ukraine. This is a country that at one time was the third largest nuclear power before they dismantled their nuclear weapons. This is also a region that has ample supplies of highly enriched uranium, has organizations such as Chechens, North China, which is, I guess, close enough, the Uyghur populations, which are all have the propensity to become groups similar to Al-Qaeda. So there's definitely a risk that an unstable Ukraine could cause some sort of nuclear use, even if not nuclear weapons, but still some sort of terrorist escalation. So I think it's important to understand that we need to stabilize the region.
So Alex, do you think we're playing enough of a role? They're all kind of saying that we should be backing out, letting the EU take more of a leadership role. Do you think we are doing enough?
It's difficult in a time where there's a democratic transition. I think that we should not be on the ground. Like if you saw in Egypt, the reason why a lot like the Muslim Brotherhood became more powerful was because they were able to point at organizations that connected with the U.S. and use them as they would point it and say, you received U.S. funding, you're a puppet for the U.S., and it made them basically lightning rods to backlash in the region. So it's important for us not to have a strong presence, visibly, but we can still have a presence in terms of allowing there to be awareness, allowing for there to be connections people make, allow for people to develop democracy there and try to take control, and still try to persuade whichever part of Ukraine or still persuade Ukraine to go towards NATO as opposed to Russia.
For Russia, other than nuclear threat, no one's really in Russia's corner. It's like they're really on the losing side. They're not. Other than horrible catastrophe of hey, let's get crazy with some nukes.
Well, I think what you risk though is driving people to Russia's corner and creating an anti-U.S. pole, right?
Okay, I would agree with that.
Because you've got the United States right now, and then you've got kind of this loose affiliation of, like Russia, Iran, North Korea, kind of Venezuela, kind of Cuba, right?
Well, Russia and China are beginning to talk.
Yeah, but that's a marriage of convenience.
We trade so much. China is not going to back Russia.
You don't think so?
No.
You don't think that's even a possibility?
If we were to
think so. I
impose
think China
enough
and the U.S.
sanctions,
have way too much going on that I do not see China backing Russia. I think it would be way too judgmental.
I think that stability issue is key, but I guess my hesitation is that we shouldn't stabilize and create a regime where 50 years down the road we're going to have the same problems like we're having in North Korea, right?
Okay.
And so we need stability, but there also needs to be some kind of conditions on whatever kind of regime takes place there to make sure that they're set up for the future and that it's not going to be an anti-democratic regime or another failed state or even another Russia, right? We want them maybe now to have more centralized power, but for there to be a path towards democracy at the very least.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think that one thing that I think this situation definitely mirrors is the way the U.S. handled the Bahrain uprisings a couple years ago.
Okay.
We did it more strategically in the sense that we had Saudi Arabian soldiers go in to shut down the uprisings. Russia did it attempting to be discreet by sending in soldiers that were unidentified. Still, though, it kind of caused backlash. So I fear that that backlash, though, could be directed at Russia, while not necessarily directed at the Western, so long as we stay out of it.
I don't think Russia is even in a good situation even for a land battle. I mean, Russia is a growing population. I mean, they have National Procreation Day because their population has been dwindling.
It's true.
I mean,
in addition to which, their military infrastructure is good on paper and rusted in reality.
Yeah.
I mean, they can barely put ships in the ocean. They can barely dispose of the trash that they create. So I do think that there are small elements where they could pitch a battle in a place like Crimea, but a larger engagement, I think, would be difficult for them to maintain, particularly if Europe were to get involved militarily.
And I kind of want to shift the conversation as well to maybe a little bit more U.S.-based. I want to ask you guys, do you think that the relationship between President Obama and President Putin, do you think that that plays any role in this? You know, they historically haven't had a great relationship, and now we've got obviously Secretary Kerry kind of in the middle there. What do you guys think about that dynamic?
I mean, I don't think Putin exists in reality. I don't think it's possible to have a good relationship with him unless you're like hunting horseback with him. I think the larger issue is that there's not a way to really have a positive relationship aside from having a strong way of projecting, because you need to deal with Russia from a realist standpoint.
Do you think that Putin takes Obama's threats seriously? I guess would be my next question for all of you.
If he doesn't, he would be really mistaken. I think that he understands how big our military arsenal is.
He doesn't want to appear as if he takes them seriously. Perhaps he does at night when he's going to sleep. Perhaps he quivers underneath his sheets, you know, his 500 count sheets, whatever they are. But nonetheless, I do think that he takes them seriously deep down. Of course, he will not express that in his public appearance. So.
Okay, well, I guess we're going to keep with the military theme. So next we transition to a topic of domestic importance. If a member of the armed forces experiences sexual assault, they must report it to their commander. The problem arises when the commander is also the perpetrator. In a bipartisan effort crafted by 3 female senators, the U.S. Senate unanimously approved a bill that changes the military justice system. One of the changes involves abandoning the practice of using the good soldier defense to raise doubts a crime has been committed. The support for this bill was in sharp contrast to last week when the Senate struck down a measure that would have stripped commanders of their authority to prosecute cases and given that power to military lawyers outside of the chain of command. That measure was vigorously opposed by military leaders. What do you guys think? How should cases like these be handled? Jenny, I want to turn to you for this one.
Well, you know, it's my understanding that they're bringing on outside lawyers that are outside the military.
They're seasoned military professionals. They're just not within the chain of command.
Okay. I think that's the right thing to bring. I definitely think having people that are outside, that aren't within the chain of command, is important. I just feel like there's too much of a tendency to for cover up. You know, if it's within the same command, within the same unit, I just feel like there's just too much.
So it's inherently problematic to have someone within the chain of command prosecuting these kind of cases.
Yes.
Okay, Ryan, what do you think about that?
I absolutely agree. I mean, I guess it sort of makes sense because you're dealing with a military code of justice that was entrenched in the 19th century, right? But we don't live there anymore, and we certainly aren't in a world where conditions like that, where conditions that surrounded that one exist now. We can create a fair justice system that both respects the military's need for discipline and autonomy, but does not allow perpetrators of sexual abuse to go free. And it really, I get worried that the military would be resistant to those efforts to try to call those people to account. Because I certainly, even as a member, if I were a member of the military, which I'm not, haven't been, if I served on the base where my commanding officer had been accused of sexual assault, particularly more than once, and he did not want an open airing of that evidence, I would have no confidence in him in terms of him being a battle leader or someone who could lead into battle. So I think it's in the military's best interest not only to defend itself as an institution, but to make sure that it has the most integrity within to open up and respect some of these changes that are being proposed right now.
What about you guys? Where should the power lie here?
Yeah, I definitely agree with kind of what the rest of the panel's been saying. I think that the current bill that was passed is not the one that should have been passed, rather the previous one that transitioned to an outside party. But I do kind of understand, not in this context of this bill, why the military is hesitant to introducing like lawfare into conflict, because there's a lot of ways that that can destroy military readiness, not relevant to sexual assault cases, but there is kind of the fear from the military perspective that if you get lawyers too actively involved, there's the risk that they start looking into like laws of armed conflict, different types of international law.
So
there's always that type of fear.
Might have a slippery slope effect, not necessarily related to sexual assault cases,
I don't
but just in
think that
general?
the bill would cause it, but I think that lawfare in general is something that is very fearful as like an asymmetrical tactic against a military that's kind of all-encompassing like the U.S.
Okay, and Jason, what do you think about that?
Right. No, I mean, I hate to agree, but I mean, you know, it is quite obvious that there needs to be some outside checks and balances here. I mean, the fact that you're the person that you report to essentially could be the one that's assaulting you sexually, and that's the only person to which you can report this abuse is absolutely it's absolutely unfair, of course, and it needs to be rectified. But I don't know if bringing in civilians from outside, essentially those who are formally affiliated with the military, I don't think that's really an appropriate thing to do. I don't know. I mean, how many of those people really are there? And you know, the fact that you would bring them in as private contractors, or how that would work, it becomes perhaps a bit cloudy. I don't think
it's a little bit sticky.
It's a little bit sticky, and perhaps again, it can lead to a slippery slope in a sense. But there needs to be taken on essentially. It just
a system can be worked. We sent a man to the moon. All right, we've got a jet that can blow up the Crimea. Okay, we can design a system that prevents members of the military from being abused sexually and having no recourse to that, right? It doesn't have to be sticky. We don't even have to have outside personnel, but we can design a political system that will both protect the military from the questions of lawfare, or at least slow that down, or provide some kind of checks, but also make sure that the person who sexually assaults you isn't the person responsible for policing sexual assault. I mean, or any crime for that matter. Robbery, regular assault, any violation of the Military Code of Justice should not be left up to the guy who might potentially be the perpetrator.
And plus, the way it's set up now, it discourages women that have been sexually assaulted to come forward. And the cases where the women have come forward, you know, it's been so difficult for them to do so. And you know, it's been such a horrible issue. Where I mean, the way it's set up now, I mean, there definitely has to be some changes. So
well, we're going to take a quick break, but I do want to return to this when we come back from the break.
Change the skin they were born with and say they die for darker skin. Sadly, some actually do. Change your thinking, not your skin. Stop tanning. Learn more at spotskincancer.org.
Help support the Breast Cancer Patient Education Act, a bill that will help make sure women facing a mastectomy are told all their options about breast reconstruction. Visit broaddayusa.org for more information.
Welcome back from the break, guys, and we are going to wrap up the military assault topic, but I want to give Alex the final word, and I'm going to kind of ask him to play devil's advocate here. What do we think the military position on this? Can you see it from the other side?
Yeah, I guess the initial part I was talking about earlier with the lawfare kind of being used as a tactic to counter the military, there's always that fear that that will be brought up against them and you start suing them in existing courts, and there's a risk that there'll be backlash and it will spill over. There's also maybe the view that it might not be as accessible to have like a JAG officer be your lawyer when you're, say, if you're put somewhere out in like the world and you're defending our country, you might not have access to a JAG officer, whereas you have access to your commander. So there might be arguments as to why it's better in that instance to go to your commander if they're not the one committing the sexual assault than for you to have to like wait to talk to a JAG officer later. So that might be some of the perspectives.
Do you think just kind of the red tape issues there, it might cause some problems from the military perspective?
In terms of like unit cohesion, but then again, like Ryan was saying earlier, there's always the issue that you wouldn't trust your commander if they're constantly...
Don't sexually assault anyone. Yeah. That solves the problem.
Done.
Well, we all wish we could live in such an ideal world, don't we?
If sexual assault is to the extent that it endangers military preparedness, we have a much bigger issue than anyone would have imagined to begin with.
All right, guys. Well, I guess we will have to wait and see how this progresses in the House. And finally, I want to briefly touch on the search for Malaysia Airline Flight 370 that vanished 4 days ago. The reason for this mysterious incident is still unknown, but as the search widens, 2 of the passengers with stolen passports were identified as young Iranians. But the terrorism theory remains just speculation. What do you guys think? Was it terrorism? Was it mechanical error? Pilot suicide? What do we think, guys? This is a very, very interesting case.
There's like a lot of conspiracy theories out there too. There's even like aliens conspiracy theories.
Moving away from the alien theories, what do we think are realistic theories?
One of the Iranian gentlemen was attempting to migrate to Germany.
Seek asylum, right?
Right. He was going to seek asylum. He was actually supposed to contact his mother when he arrived, and the other gentleman was, I believe, going to Amsterdam, and they do not believe.
He probably wanted to make that.
Right, right. They were. And then there was some speculation. Well, maybe he was trying to smuggle marijuana, you know.
Well, that's what they said. That why do you think they had stolen passports? What do you think the motive behind that? If it wasn't terrorism, if it wasn't
look,
hijacking?
I mean, they're coming from Iran.
Sanctions always on Iranian.
That's the thing.
That's probably right too.
Yeah.
But even all of that doesn't. What happened to the black box, man? Like, where's all? Where's the physical evidence? Like, if it crashed in the ocean, the oil slick, the debris.
Well, the oil slick is not from a plane.
Right. That's right. So there should be one note if it's in the ocean.
I would like to bring up before we discuss that we just actually did receive some breaking news that they believe that they may have found it. Now they
it was from a Chinese satellite.
Yeah.
In the ocean, though.
Yes.
No, but this one, the breaking news one.
Yes.
Yeah, it was about an hour ago.
About an hour ago. So they haven't identified it positively yet, but they believe that they have found it. And then in that case, they would be able to locate those black boxes. They're pinging, and it's within that 30 days. So they would have a clearer picture.
What's so crazy is that they had such a large area of where the plane could have been, where there was an online source that was asking individuals to look at these different areas. So they're asking like just everyday people like, hey, can you try to search for this plane? Which is so wild to me, especially in this day and age with technology and cameras and basically so much surveillance. I'm thinking, how can this plane be missing for so long?
The fact that the plane actually turned around 180 degrees and was heading back towards Malaysia for quite some time.
With no distress signal,
right, no distress signal or anything of that nature, and the fact that the GPS, kind of similar to what we would call a GPS signal, was shut off. And by the way, it can
be shut off.
It can be shut off manually. Well, no, it's not. I've read some literature, and apparently you can isolate that piece of equipment and shut it off because it could be a fire hazard in some instance. And so that was shut off, and so some were speculating that perhaps it was taken over, that it was a hijacking.
Do we think, I mean, you bring up a very good point, because I know that they were kind of speculating, looking very closely into the lives of the pilots, saying that perhaps this was pilot suicide
it's a Boeing 777, and that's one of the safest aircraft that's on the market.
And it was at cruising altitude when this
35,000 feet
expected to all go down. So
the island at which it was traced flying over before they were not able to track it any longer was I believe they thought it was at around 34,000 feet or just below cruising altitude, and then it just vanished entirely. Apparently the U.S. satellites did not detect any explosion midair. Of course, this is kind of suppositional. I don't, these are things that are kind of
it's all
brought up in the media
at this point. But Alex, I ask you, what do we think? All this mysterious information.
I think it just crashed. I think there was an issue. I think that if it was a terrorist act, like either it failed miserably, or like the goal of terrorism is to incite fear and backlash, and they just.
But even if it was a crash, right, it would be an incredible set of coincidences that there was no distress call, the GPS was turned off, the black box isn't functioning, it turned right around, right? It would have to align. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't just a crash. I'm not saying it was just a crash. I'm just saying that if it is a crash, it's an incredible set of circumstances, right?
Yeah, they're just kind of crazy.
On the other hand, though, I have I've come across some users, and I've
Reddit?
I'm not on Reddit, but there are some forums where people go on and say, well, I'm a pilot. I used to fly for a major airline, and it's really not that uncommon to not make a distress call, because your #1 priority is to actually pilot the plane. If it's in a condition that is failing, you have to pilot it first. You have to put away the distress call. Don't worry about it. Just worry about actually trying to find something, or trying to land the plane potentially in water or on land. There was one pilot, apparently a so-called pilot, who speculated that there was a mechanical dysfunction, and there might have been some sort of small explosion that blew the door off of the jet, which is an outward opening door, and that door perhaps was sucked into one of the jets, and then it crashed.
Yeah, they said that engine failure would be one of the reasons why something like this would happen. But Jenny, what do you think? We've ruled out aliens, or at least we're going to for the purposes of our discussion. But what do you think? Terrorism?
I don't think that's right.
Never rule out aliens.
This could be the first one, man.
You know what? If they discover that black box, then we will certainly have you back on, Ryan, to discuss it. But Jenny, what do you think?
I feel like if it was a hijacking, there would be a group already saying that this
taking
was
responsibility
taking
for
responsibility,
it?
you know, and be already out there in the media.
I also want to say, just because 2 Iranians were on the plane, that's not really a fair diagnosis for terrorism.
I agree with you, Ryan. Well, that's
They'll need a little bit more evidence than that.
I think they're just trying to keep all the possibilities open because it is so mysterious. However, that is all the time we have today. So now you know what we think. Let us know what you think. Share your opinions and any ideas or topics you'd like us to scramble about to thescramble.unlv@gmail.com. You can also catch full episodes of The Scramble at unlv.tv. And for all of us here at The Scramble, thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.